March and start with the opening of Lent. Well, this weekend is also significant because it's the first weekend of a new year in the calendar, a new year when we come together, 2014. And so for a number of reasons, we're sort of in a transition moment. A new chapter is beginning. It's a time when we start considering kind of what's been going on, our beginnings, where we are, where we're headed, and where we want to be in our walk with God, and I believe in our life together as a new church plant, as the Abbey. We actually met this last week with Tim Cool, who's a part of an architectural firm and out of Charlotte that's walking through kind of where we are and what our vision and values are and what we're all about in the shaping of this new work together. And then this Monday and Tuesday, we're going to be with Steve Goggins and do it again and look at our vision and our values and what we're up to and where we're headed. It's just a time to sort of solidify, clarify, and define what we are, what we want to be, and what will really set us apart in our work to extend the kingdom and share the good news with those in our community and beyond. Some of us find this exciting. Some of us actually enjoy it. We like to think, we like to reflect. As Margaret has told y'all with a sneer many times, I love the unexamined life is not worth living. I actually agree with that. I think we need to think and reflect. Some of us find it energizing to really take stock and transition points, whether they be out of seasons into a new season from Christmas to Epiphany or out of 2013 into 2014 is an occasion to do this. Some of us are more inclined to launch out into new things and to share and experience new things. I know that I'm that way. I've always been that way. It's not a new development. At age 66, I have a suspicion it's never going to end for me. But I could have gone to seminary anywhere I had wanted to go, but I chose to go to England. Why? It's a new place. I hadn't been there. Why don't we do that? Go study with J.I. Packer, see what's going on. Come on, Margaret. She was not that excited about it. It seemed a long way off. We don't know anybody there. We don't know where we're going to be. I know, but this could be an adventure. Well, that kind of thing led me into a variety of dioceses before I ever came here. And then I came to Pawleys Island, and my life in parish life has always been one adventure after another adventure. I tend to not want to do what we've always done. I want to do something new and do new things that God has in store for us. And those of you that have worked with me and walked with me for years know that that's something I'm not telling you that you didn't know. It just is. It's the way I am. And I think it expressed itself in the launching of a mission society to plant churches all over North America because it needs to happen. Nobody's doing it. We can do it. It can be birthed out of this community of faith, and it can plant hundreds of churches across North America. I just tend to be wired like that, inclined toward launching out. You must be, or you wouldn't be sitting here. Your lives are not so boring that you have absolutely nothing else to do, and you want to what? Start a new church? Where? You don't know. We spent a year trying to sort out where, and now we're in the carriage house, and it's filling up rapidly, and we find ourselves doing things that some people are not wired to do. You are. You're clearly wired to do it. Well, the gospel lesson this morning tells us that Joseph was also like this. He was at least prepared to launch out and move in new directions because what we saw was someone who was led and who was directed and instructed to move in new directions through his dreams. And here's the kicker. He followed the dreams. Now, our minds tend to wander when people are reading. No offense, Doc. So you may or may not have kept up with the gospel reading. But the gospel reading actually tells a story of Joseph having a dream. And in the dream, he was told to go to Egypt. And he did it. The gospel that we just read told a story of him having a second dream. And this time it was to go back to Israel. And he did it. Believe it or not, Doug just read, the third dream was to go to Galilee, to Nazareth. Where? We're not from Nazareth. Why Nazareth? But he did it. He was prepared to follow his dreams. Our heroes, biblically and in the faith, have always been people who were prepared to follow the dreams, even into uncertainty and even with uncertainty. So we look to people like Abraham, who just kind of left everything you were familiar with and you launched out into where. You'll know when you get there. That's not very defined. But that was the Abrahamic call. You'll know when you get there. It'd be better if you would give me the zip code now, and I would know where I'm headed. But no, you'll know when you get there. Some of us have felt that a little bit over the last 12 months. We'll know when we get there. Moses was the same kind of way. You're going to leave everything that's familiar, Moses, and your everything that you would have thought was a new life you had started, and you're going to go back into Egypt and do what? And tell the but he follows that lead and does it. Joseph, that we just read about, was such a guy as well. He was somebody that was willing to hear something, to discern something, to remember something, this kind of dream, and then step out and risk boldly and believe God's promises and God's future enough to actually go. He did it again and again and again. Now, others find this kind of attitude less satisfying. Others tend to want to, can we just settle? Can we nest? Can we just get a place and stay put? And can I just have some peace with pay? Can I have some comfort without stirring the pot? Others face a new year with very little excitement or anticipation or necessarily joy. Hey, wait, it's a new year. 2014, that means I'm a year older. That's not so good. So a lot of this has to do with attitude and how we look at our lives. Some people consider themselves to be more or less stuck and trapped by circumstances, and one more year ticking off doesn't help a thing. For a number of years now, we've been using in the Anglican Mission a coach, really, and an author and a teacher from California, Terry Walling, and he wrote a book that was entitled Stuck. And in that book, he basically highlights the reality that people actually go through a lot of phases in which they experience some of this, the feeling of, I think I'm sort of in between time, and I'm kind of stuck with where I am. They tend to be periods that are characterized by, something bubbling, restlessness. They're characterized by lack of motivation, sometimes job stagnation. I don't know what I want to do for a living, but I'm not sure I want to keep doing this for a living. And these periods, these in-between times, are predictable. And we need to consider how we respond when we go through them. Terry Walling breaks it into sort of three different sort of defined moments that this tends to bubble up. And one of them is awakening periods of time when people are in their 20s and 30s, where they kind of got out of school and they kind of settled down, they kind of have a job, and I guess it should kind of be okay now, and then stuff starts to bubble up, and I think I'm going to do something else. That is, in my case, and that takes place usually in your 20s or so, that in my case is when I decided I'm going to go into the ministry. I really am going to do that. And that started enormous conversation with Margaret about, because sometimes you have vision collision, and her vision for me was to do something else. And it wouldn't matter much what else. Just, we're not going to do preacher. We can do lawyer, you can teach in seminary, you can teach theology we don't want to, anyway. But that was that bubbling up period of restlessness and sorting out kind of what, then the next thing Terry Walling identifies is what he calls a deciding phase, when some real decisions start being made. And this usually happens in the mid-40s, early 50s. That mid-40s for me was probably when I decided in my mind I was staying in Pawleys Island. When I first came here, I told people I'll stay 4 or 5 years, but I've never stayed anywhere in my life over that. I don't see myself staying longer, and so let's see what we can do in 4 or 5 years. But by the time I got into my mid-40s, I really had sort of a sense of God wanted me here, and I'm going to stay here. I love it. The kids love it. The church is fun. They're willing to do things. That was a sort of deciding moment in my mid-40s when I knew that I was going to do whatever I do here in Pawleys Island. So I look back and say, well, that was right. The finishing time is a third moment that bubbles up for people in their mid-50s and 60s, in which they have another sort of restlessness in between. What's that going to look like and what's that going to be? It was in my mid-50 range that I began to say, somebody's got to do something about the crisis of faith and leadership that existed in the old club that we were in. And so I'm going to do it. Here, I'll do it. Here we go. And the Anglican mission was birthed. And it took all kinds of directions and paths, which is a story for another day. But it accomplished many, many things and will continue to under the new leadership of Bishop Philip Jones, H. Miller, and the team that's in place. Bob Grant, the whole crowd. They are going somewhere. But I'm using these as examples of I can even look in my life and say, yeah, I had these in-between moments, whether it was in my 20s or my 40s or my 50s, and I can remember, and those were defining moments that were very important. Believe it or not, Terry Willing needs to add another one because now I'm in my mid to late 60s and I'm having another one. Let's go do an Abbey. And so let's see what God will do with us with an Abbey. And that's where we are now. And it feels right, feels good. I think it's exactly what God would have us do. But the point I want to make is that if we don't actually do something, move in some way, we will experience being stuck. And that's why he wrote the book. And we need to consider what we're prepared to do if we are not going to stay stuck. And he quotes something, he writes the following, to basically say it involves sort of letting go of a lot of stuff in order to move into the future. He says, you are faced with a sobering truth. In order to go on, you've got to let go of what brought you to where you are. We cannot go on without turning our backs on all the things that actually brought you to this point. So whether I'm turning my back on living in America and going to England, or whether I'm turning my back on going to another diocese and doing a new thing and staying in Pawleys, or whether I'm turning my back on what I've been enjoying and doing at All Saints and start the AMIA, or whether I turn my back on what I had been doing in the AMIA and come into the Abbey, it involves a sort of letting go and launching out. And I see this in the story that Doug read. Joseph, letting go and launching out. Each time followed a dream that he discerned that God was sort of nudging him and pointing him in these directions. I want us to hear it because it applies to every single one of us. I've tried to give my examples to say that you're the same way. And this is a very, very important moment as we launch into a new year, 2014. The reality is that some people won't because they are comfortable. I don't need more hassle and I don't need a headache. I would like some peace and quiet. Some people will tend to stay stuck and not keep moving and keep moving out. I believe it was Henry David Thoreau said, the mass of men live lives of quiet desperation. They're not going to tell you about it at the coffee hour. They're not going to tell you about it at the cocktail hour. They're not going to tell you about it probably ever because they fake smile. But his point was the mass of men live lives of quiet desperation. And stuck would suggest it'll stay that way if we're not prepared to keep moving. We follow a God of action, and he's going to keep taking us places. And that's what you saw in the gospel reading, Joseph, and that's what you see in the biblical heroes, and that's what you see in our own life and in our own experience. And the attitude of living life with quiet desperation is a slap in the face to the good news of God and everything we heard in the lessons. What? And Jesus says, I come to give you life and that more abundant. And you say, I know, but I'm settling in on quiet desperation. Anyway, some good stuff's on television. The Scripture is filled with promises of life and that more abundant, not lives of quiet desperation. If you look at the Old Testament lesson that we heard today, which again our minds might have been wandering, so I will remind you, it's a vision of hope and promise and deliverance and new beginnings. Sing aloud with gladness for Jacob. Shout shouts, give praise, and say, the Lord has saved us. That kind of exuberance, that kind of energy is our first lesson. And that's not lives lived in quiet desperation, if you hear what I'm saying. The gospel lesson that I've referred to again and again is the same kind of thing. Instead of disaster, the king wants to kill your kid. Instead of disaster, Joseph got direction. Joseph was able to know what the Lord would have him do. Instead of being trapped, instead of being caught up in circumstances beyond his control, circumstances that he can't change, he finds the Lord moving him and taking him into a new chapter, a new life, a new beginning. So I want to hear that and hold that up as we launch this first weekend of the 2014 new year. And again, the promise is that life, and that more abundant. And so I want us to think about that as we think about our lives, if we think about our situations, and we think about our attitudes, frankly. It is easy to slip into the attitude of humdrum. Well, it's just the way it is, you know? The dice sort of cast. I roll the dice. It kind of landed that way. And again, there's television or something. Life is filled with people that take that stance, that attitude. So I'm raising a question. Will we approach the next chapter, 2014, and what God has in store for us, with some excitement and some energy and not the sensation of being stuck? Or will we throw up our hands and go the other route, which is not very exciting and not very helpful, and the sense of going nowhere, but I just got to make it to the end, whatever that's supposed to be. Years ago, I came across a thought-provoking book that I gave to a number of y'all because you were stuck, and you told it and shared it with me, and I know it, and I'm still giving that book out. I recently gave it to a minister in town that I knew was stuck, and that type of thing. But anyway, these are books that sort of try to capture this thought and capture this thing. This particular book, some of you remember, is Who Moved the Cheese? I don't know if you remember that book, Who Moved My Cheese? Anyway, I talked about it with you, and it too talks about situations and times of change, situations and times of, I don't know, things aren't working the way I thought they should or would. Things have gone wrong and whatever. It was about staying stuck in a prison or moving out and finding a new beginning. Taking a chance on the promise of a new day and a new way and a new beginning in the new year. The book opens with some words from the British novelist A.J. Cronin, and I'm going to read them to you. He writes, "Life is no straight and easy corridor along which we travel free and unhampered, but a maze of passages through which we must seek our way. Lost and confused now and again, but always, if we have faith, God will open a door for us. Not perhaps the one we would have thought, but one that will ultimately prove good for us." Well, when I read that, I think about what happened in my experience with the All Saints story and the way, wow, what was that all about? But, how did he word it? One that will ultimately prove good for us. And that birthed the Abbey. And that birthed something God purposes to do for every single one of us. Anyway, the key characters in the book of Who Moved My Cheese are two guys, him and Hall. Him and Hall, playful. Anyway, the setting is the maze, and the maze, of course, is all the corridors and changes and possibilities that lie before you. Some open up into wonderful rooms filled with all that we wanted, and some end in blind alleys and dead ends and things we didn't want. And the maze, of course, represents life, and you have to read it. So it takes about an hour. It's not a very profound and deep, long book, but it makes a point. And in the story, cheese represents everything you wanted in life. And so when they come into rooms, him and Hall, and find cheese, they celebrate. Got what I wanted, exactly what I needed. And cheese, of course, is whatever it is that we think makes life good for us. Cheese can be family. It can be careers. It can be money. It can be a nice home, feeling safe, feeling secure, good friends, good health, whatever you think makes life good for us. Life with God for some, whatever. That's the cheese in the book. Anyway, the little guys found a cheese supply in a room that they could not believe it. They had everything they could have wanted. They were so excited. As time went on, they became less excited because the human nature being the way it is, after a while, I know it's just cheese. I'm glad I have cheese, but anyway, it's just cheese. But one day, what happened to them was they walked in and the room was empty. Hence the title, Who Moved My Cheese? And they were furious, depressed, in a funk, did not know where to go from here. Him was absolutely immobilized. He could not even function. Just sat there and kind of chewed his ankle. Hall, on the other hand, after going through a little brief depression, said, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit in an empty room. The cheese is gone. If you notice, too much my cheese. I'm going to head out down some of these maze corridors and see what God might have for me. And so he does, and he goes down, and make a long story short, he finds what he needed. He got new life, found new cheese, and all that kind of thing. And it has to do, the point is, with our attitudes when we go through predictable transition points and feel a little stuck or disillusioned or disappointed. I remember reading a book about, it was about a psychiatrist, William Martson, that interviewed 3,000 different people and asked them a basic question. What do you have to live for? And what he was surprised to discover is after hemming and hawing, no pun intended, he found that over 90%, he says 94%, but over 90% of the people, in one way or another, what do you have to live for? Were waiting. Waiting. And then, of course, he would unplug that and explore it with them, but they were stuck more or less, but they were waiting for something. That trip, that vacation, that new job, that new relationship, for the kids to grow up, or for retirement, or for whatever. They were in one way or another waiting. Well, this morning God tells us something has already happened. Stop the wait. God tells us that I've given my Son, Jesus Christ, and He is the door to a new life and a new chapter and a new year and a new thing. We don't need to wait anymore. He's the door, and He's the life and the way. And He's the release from the prison that we sometimes find ourselves in of our own making, or sometimes circumstances and situations that put us kind of in a down funk type of attitude. This morning in our lessons, God is saying, stop the waiting. I have given you the gift of the Holy Spirit, which is the Lord and giver of life, and that more abundant, not life lived in quiet desperation. Stop the wait and move. Move into the new things that are before you. Move in the directions the Lord is leading. Take the chances. Take the steps. My question, of course, is, as we move into the new year, so what about you? A, do you find yourself hemming and hawing? And do you find yourself kind of waiting? And do you find yourself with feelings of being sort of stuck? Do you feel like somebody did move your cheese? The very things that were supposed to make you so happy aren't making you happy like they did before. And if you are in these positions, what are you going to do about it? What do you see up ahead? That's what the Lord wants to ask in this worship service. You've heard the lessons. You've heard the gospel. You've seen my actions. You've seen me move. What do you see? Do you see doorways or dead ends? What do you see? Do you see a roadblock or do you see a road out? What goes on in your mind? Do you see the promise or only the problems? And those attitudes and the way you answer those questions are going to profoundly affect how 2014 unfolds for you and for me and for all of us. I'll tell you what I see. I see an Abbey, which is a community of faith that is going to be a teaching center, and that's going to be a retreat center, and that's going to be a place where you, and I came up with 4 E's because it's easier to remember, but where you begin to come together and frankly attract people to come together, and the promises of God and the good news is explained, and then it is explored, and then it is expected. I actually expect some of this. And divinely, it is experienced. And you show me a place where the gospel, the good news, and the promises of God are explained and explored. I don't care whether through small groups or through small settings or in the adult forums or whatever, but explained and explored and expected and experienced. And I'll show you some people who are not stuck, but people like Joseph, who are following the dream, have the vision, and are prepared to move on. God promises us, I will protect you. I will see you through. I will make it work for you, Joseph or whoever. And that's the promise for all of us. We are going to be a people led by the Lord into the new things that God has for us in 2014 and beyond. Amen?